Hello, the next presenter is me. I'm Joe Behan, and my topic today is the changing face of dispute resolution in construction. This is my company, Behan Dispute Resolution. I am an engineer by background, and I've been involved in the construction industry for gentleman at the back there who will tell you exactly when. So, what is changing in construction dispute resolution, particularly, rather than dispute resolution generally? When I started off in dispute resolution, you had arbitration as an alternative. That was it. And happy days for all us arbitrators. Conciliation then became the next step, and everybody decided to chase that road down. So we had conciliation. Mediation never really kicked in construction officially through the contracts, except in the CIF's contract, the subcontract where there's provisions. The only contract in existence in Ireland that has provision for mediation within the construction industry. That itself seems to have been brought on some problems, and certainly as a mediator under that contract recently on 2 cases, I have found that it hasn't exactly worked as it may have been intended to work. So we've all been stuck with conciliation, and what's happened then, of course, was with the first GCC contracts, they made the recommendations under these conciliations to be based on the recommendations must be based on the rights and obligations of parties under the contract. When I started conciliating, if I had to write a recommendation, I would always find myself in the space between where they almost got to. So it was, for me at that time, I would conciliate and recommend the space where they could do business. But that's no longer the way, and recommendations have to be on the basis of the rights and obligations of the parties under the contract, which has brought about a complete sea change in the approach to conciliation, where it's absolutely almost a complete legal process akin to arbitration, or a quasi-legal process akin to arbitration, which has added hugely to the costs and possibly taken away from the idea of it. So GCC, in their wisdom, looked at the public works contracts and decided that they would introduce a new system. So following that review, what they've brought in, which is effective, is the project board and the dispute management procedure. That's the first part of this new thing. So that comes into effect now, but it also probably only will kick in the beginning of next year, because it will be the contracts that are signed to which this will be applicable. What is a project board? Well, essentially it's a high-level talking shop, and I'll talk about that myself now in a second. But this escalation procedure only applies to disputes that arise under 10.5.4 and 10.5.5, and only of the CF1s to CF4s, not all the contracts. And I will show you a table that outlines what's missing. It also brings in a nominated conciliator, a standing conciliator, so that every project over 10 million in value has to have a standing conciliator. So that conciliator is similar to the standing adjudicator on lots of international contracts. So you will have a standing conciliator from the beginning of the contract right through, the same person. So the question is, who nominates this person? Is it the client in agreement with the contractor? Is it the contractor who insists on, or what happens if they can't agree? Where do they go? Well, what they do is they go back into the contract, and it's the nominating body for conciliators who will then get to nominate the standing conciliator. For contracts between 5 and 10 million, you can choose to have a standing conciliator depending on the nature of the contract. So the figures of 5 and 10 million are important. Under 5 million you need nothing, but above 5 million you must have the project board as well. I'll talk about that in a moment. So this is effectively what the GCC decided to do, was to try and bring in the concept of dispute avoidance rather than dispute resolution by putting in these upfront systems and running systems rather than that the disputes occur, that the resolution occurs after the dispute arises. Which obviously in itself introduces more timelines and more notices for which the construction industry isn't known as being well up or not following. A lot of people don't follow the timelines and the notices to their detriment. But will this dispute avoidance actually stop adjudication? Is the big question. You've already heard 3 speakers today talk about adjudication. And the answer, of course, is it can't, because adjudication is statutory. I hope you can read this table, but this is a table taken from GCC's own guidance on dispute resolution. I think these slides are possibly going to be made available to you, I don't know. But this is a table, it's contained, show you the reference. It's guidance note 311 of the GCC. That's the guidance note. It's not short, but it explains in full what has to happen with projects from now on. So it's important to follow that up. But you can see there that this dispute management procedure is only for the first 4 of those contracts, and the without prejudice discussion is for all of them. And they've brought in the concept of no arbitration, but court for 2 of the contracts. So we're now into the great, as yet unknown, and the new world of dispute avoidance and let's talk, or rather let's talk at a high level. In America they have a system of mini trial, if any of you are familiar with it, where when there's a dispute, the top people in each organisation get together with a third party like me, and they have what's called a mini trial. And it's hugely successful because mostly those people haven't been involved in the disputes. They're not on the ground, they're not engaged in the nitty-gritty, they're not involved in the personalities and the relationship breakdowns. So they can deal with it purely as a very, very business arrangement, and it's a very useful process. So I think this project board will work very well if people follow it. The question is, shall we mediate? And then they say, well, what's mediation? Or is this a type of mediation? Are they trying to bring in mediation by the back door? I think they might be, because the project board can also bring in this standing conciliator to act as a mediator. It's all very kind of around the houses. But so what will happen to conciliation? Will it be deemed just to be an adjudication light, which it effectively is? And is it bye-bye to arbitration? Have we seen the end of arbitration effectively, as happened in the UK? Or since now there's provision in 2 of these GCC contracts for litigation as opposed to arbitration, will we see people deciding instead that they'll go to court? And you've already had this one this morning and once this afternoon. Somebody serves you with a notice to refer. And what happens to all the stuff I've just talked about? Puff goes the magic dragon. Because you're then in statutory mode rather than in contract mode. But what about in private contracts and the future of dispute resolution? will they be relevant? Will people actually use those contracts, or will they start more and more using the PwC contracts? And where will statutory adjudication fit into these contracts? Well, they have to. They have to be all changed to accommodate it. So you'll enter into a situation, and I have had this in Northern Ireland particularly, and sometimes in Britain, where people are adjudicating within a contract, then they're adjudicating again, and then they're adjudicating again on different matters. And they're beginning to find that they're spending money at a rate of knots. And they're being challenged, and the enforcement isn't working. So they say, maybe, let's talk. And time and again I get calls to come into situations where people are ready to adjudicate, and they've decided to kind of hold it like a weapon and say, well, maybe we can talk. What about conciliating? It's outside the contract, but why don't we try it? And time and again, it works. Because they've seen that adjudication is hugely costly, and we're going to probably go down the same road. We're going to start off in July with a whole heap of adjudications, and everybody's saying, yeah, let's go, we've been waiting for this for years. And then they'll find, actually, maybe it isn't just quite as good as we think it might be. Because they'll be down the courts with enforcement, there'll be challenges to the adjudicators, there'll be challenges to everything known to man, because the law is actually bad law. So they'll be saying, well, do you fancy mediation or conciliation? Or maybe, can we just agree, maybe we'll just take it straight to court. So what about ODR, online dispute resolution? Will that have any merit within these things? I've just finished an arbitration in Dubai. And the first time I met my co-arbitrators, there were 3 of us on the tribunal, was 2 days before we signed the award. Because everything was done online. We'd never met, we'd never seen each other, we had spoken to each other, but we had never actually done anything else except use our computers. So is there a space in this whole thing, since the ODR is coming in small consumer disputes, will there be room for ODR within this framework as well? Some of your speakers spoke this morning about the July date and the incoming adjudication and so my attitude is, well, actually what's going to happen in practice? I've spoken to some subcontractors and they're just lining themselves up. They can't wait for this to happen because they just feel it's going to be part and parcel of what happens in their business. They're going to be adjudicating because that's part and parcel of the way you behave. So will the PwC arbitration provisions, whereby our friends in the GCC are entitled to private awards and entitled to see recommendations by conciliators, will they also be able to see the decisions of adjudicators? Will it influence the choice of adjudicator? Will mediation and conciliation in the construction industry disappear with this imposition of adjudication? Who will be the first adjudicator in the forecourts? I hope it's not me. And I'd say all of the 30 of us on the government panel are dreading being the first ones, because we're going to be the ones who are going to be down in the forecourts. And we're going to be on the television as the first adjudicator taken down to forecourts. So if you see me on TV, it may be for different reasons than today. Who will the point is that the parties appoint? They don't really have time to agree. They can't even agree on anything else. So can there be an agreement? Will they go straight to the list? Will they go straight down to Niall Bunny and say, I want, just nominate somebody? Is that the way it's going to happen? And who will be picked? Because it's a 28-day process. I've had the experience of doing it in the UK, and I have to say, it's very stressful as an adjudicator. You have to drop everything practically to do these things. You cannot sort of say, well, I'll do it on Friday evening and maybe Saturday morning, because it takes everything you've got to give that decision within those 28 days. Because you'll get an army load of paper dropped on your doorstep. Will we have an Irish solution to statutory adjudication where timelines get stretched a little. That wouldn't be unusual for us. And in 5 years' time, will those who want to join the panel have to undergo training? Have to go conversion? A lot of us had to convert from being arbitrators into being adjudicators. It was a 6-day examination process, and I have to say, it was probably the most stressful thing I ever did in my life. And if yes, why? Because there are people on the panel who didn't do the conversion. And just some more questions for you. What will happen with the contractors? How will they behave? Will it be gung-ho from day one? Will we have 6 different panels? We already have a government panel. There's a Chartered Institute of Arbitrators panel being put together. And you can bet your bottom dollar there's going to be Engineers Ireland panel, the Architects panel, maybe the QSs, the Bar, and the Law Society panels. So we're going to have a whole heap of panels, I suspect, for you to choose from. Will there be challenges to the panel because of the way that the interviews took place? I know one person who's pretty much close to going to court on this because he wasn't interviewed. What about those who failed to get on it like him? What about the parties to the dispute? Will they look at this panel and think maybe there was a problem with the way it was put together? What about unsuccessful people involved in adjudications? Will they take action against this panel? Because the chair of the panel, as enshrined in the legislation, was to be chosen from the panel members. But guess what? The person who chairs the panel was chosen before the panel was put in place and actually interviewed the members for it. I bet you there's a challenge in there somewhere. Will the Act be just used as a threat? Will the courts interpret the Act the way they did in the UK? And when will we have this famous code of practice? I keep believing it's due anytime soon. And will it give enforcement difficulties? You can bet your bottom dollar that that's where the action's going to be, in the enforcement. And will we all end up, as I just said earlier, back conciliating? I'm going to leave you with some pictures. This is the dream of the adjudicator. Calmly riding these 2 horses, the 2 parties, gently through the ring. This may be the adjudicator's fantasy. 2 wild horses, these 2 wild parties. Yes. And by the way, there are no female members of the government panel. Or is this going to be the adjudicator's reality? Is it going to be riding a wild horse? I much suspect it might be. And is this a fair representation of statutory adjudication in Ireland as it's going to be? 2 half-blind parties going through a hoop of fire with an in-control adjudicator. Thank you.